Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Levy with Ipsos Canada, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 10th webinar in our Path Forward series. It's a rainy, thunderstormy day here in Toronto, and I should tell you that over the past couple of months, we've covered a bunch of different issues in these webinars. All of them have been recorded and downloaded, so you can access them at any point that you'd like. There's a few quick housekeeping matters before we start. The first is that while you will remain in listen-only mode, you can ask questions by simply clicking on the question button. Now, time permitting, we will answer those questions, but if we do run out of time, we'll be sure to get back to you via email. Today's session is also being recorded and will be available within the next 48 hours. Now, our intent with this program has very much been to share what we're seeing, what our partners are seeing, and what our clients are seeing, all of which have been really rooted in relevant business issues that are clearly related to the kinds of things that you are seeing and hearing in your businesses. At Ipsos, we continue to run a weekly COVID tracking study. We started it back in March. It's continued since March. We've seen some fascinating changes over time. It's also a study that we've been running in 13 markets around the globe. Most recently, our tracking has been showing some cracks, if you like, in the Canadian mosaic, with a large proportion of the public agreeing that racism in this country is on the rise and that we're essentially less welcoming of those from other countries. So some disturbing trends that we're seeing in most recent times. Our webinar today, as the title suggests, is very much focused on emerging consumer behaviors. Some of what you hear and see today is based on an ongoing program of research that we're going to share for the first time today. You'll likely see some press releases in the near future, but today is the first time that you'll see some of this stuff. Nami Hawk is our webinar lead today. He's the guy that leads much of the shopper research that we do here in Canada. Nami, over to you. At this point, we're going to turn off our cameras. We'll bring them back into play during the question and answer period a little later. So Nami, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. I'll turn my camera off here as well. So as Steve mentioned, I work on a lot of the shopper projects we've been involved with, including our COVID-19 related shopper research, and we've been looking at that since the very beginning of this pandemic, so we've got a lot of trending data, which is great. Again, today I'm sharing some really early results from our latest wave of the COVID-19 View Forward Behavior Tracker, just hot off the press. Now there's a number of metrics that we capture about Canadians and what they're doing month to month, but today we're essentially going to cover just one issue, one very important issue, and it's the one issue that really every single one of our clients has been trying to understand, and that's the issue of what will stick, or more specifically, what consumer behaviors will stick and be longer lasting, behaviors. So today is really about trying to predict the future. Now, I don't know who's seen the 1990s sci-fi movie Demolition Man, starring Sylvester Stallone and Sandra Bullock. This is supposed to be a gift, but if you saw the movie, you might remember that there's a very strange contact-free high five. It's the contact-free handshake of the future. It's this dystopian future, and you sort of almost do a high five, and you stop about a foot from each other, you throw your hands together, and then you sort of part without any touching. It was a quirky, it was comedic, and it was a depiction of the future where, to quote the movie, the rampant exchange of bodily fluids was one of the major reasons for the downfall of society. It sort of sounded ridiculous at the time, and if you watch the movie, you'd be like, there's no way that's going to be the future, that's not likely to stick. I remember, sort of made me laugh when they were doing it. But, in fact, they actually did do a pretty good job in that movie of predicting the future that we're living in today. Almost 30 years later, this is where we're at. This is a picture of my parents. They come over, for a backyard visit, and we do social distancing hugs. We're not actually touching each other. We're just sort of giving ourselves a hug from 6 feet away. So, Demolition Man did quite get it right. Now, we're not sci-fi writers, but we have employed some behavioral science techniques and some modeling to try to take an educated guess at what behaviors are going to be part of our new normal, at least until a vaccine is broadly available. A lot of people have reported on shopping intent, shoppers' stated behaviors, what they think they're going to be doing in the next 12 months or 18 months. And really what we're going to show you today goes a step even beyond that. So what's going to stick? Just to start off, predicting the future, it's a difficult business. I think as an advisory industry, we do a really excellent job of talking about what's happened and increasingly, what is happening right now. But we're not always the best at predicting. If you look at predictions from governments, from consulting companies about what will happen during this pandemic, a lot of those early predictions were pretty off base. But still, we're going to try, and we're going to try to predict what is likely to stick. So specifically, we're going to be talking about some new emerging behaviors, a number of different behaviors that we tested, things like re-engagement in certain categories that have been quiet for a while, things like going to the mall or visiting movie theaters. We're going to be talking about in-store behaviors, shopping online. We're going to be talking about safety measures that people feel are necessary, and just changes in routine that may cause new opportunities or risks for different industries. And we really think the time invested in trying to predict these behaviors, and for you on the phone, the time spent trying to think about how your brand should respond to these changes, it's absolutely worth it. Likely we're going to be living in this new altered reality, the new normal, for quite some time. Now, part of our goal is to help brands and retailers make plans for today. Today we're seeing retail and shopping starting to bounce back. We're seeing a slow shift back to buying non-essentials, albeit, in a more online or in a highly controlled retail environment. So the graph on the page, for example, we're seeing purchases of clothing, makeup, footwear have started to increase. In the graph here, we're looking at percentage of Canadians that have made a category purchase in the past 2 weeks, the latest data being from the end of May, and we're seeing an uptick in a lot of these non-essential categories. So that, part of that is helping today, but the bigger question is about tomorrow and how to plan for the second half of the year and well into 2021. So even consumers have been telling us that they think these changes in their own behaviors are likely to last until 2021 and maybe even beyond. So almost half, 43% of consumers think it'll be next winter or later before they resume, their pre-COVID activities. 2/3, 66% say they'd be comfortable visiting them, that they wouldn't be comfortable visiting a mall even 3 months after social distancing rules have relaxed. So, even if the government comes out and says today, we know today malls are opening this week, that a lot of people are saying, even 3 months after today, it might be when I'm feeling comfortable that I'm going to go into a mall. So it could be a bit of a long haul. And so we really want to help companies develop a strategy for the second half of the year, the busy holiday shopping season. Our feeling is that when we think about things like back to school and Halloween, Black Friday, Cyber Monday, the big Christmas rush, Boxing Week, and even New Year's shopping, it's going to look a lot different than it has in previous years. To be clear, what we're seeing is that Canadians are still going to be shopping in the fall, but what it's going to look like for brands and retailers is going to be very, very different. one of the things, so we know for certain, and we know this from other research projects as well as this one, is that holiday shopping in 2020 is going to be more digital and more omnichannel than ever. I mean, things have been going in that direction for quite some time, but it's going to be significantly accelerated this year. So we're seeing, 77% of people say that when they go to a store, they're spending less time browsing because they want to get in and out quickly. That's just a reality of today. But what that means is that you're going in more prepared. You're doing more research in advance, and you're likely going online to identify what you want to buy before you step into the store. We have 35%, about a third of shoppers say they feel shopping online has been a good replacement for shopping that they used to do in store. And we're going to dig more deeply into why that is. But again, it's an indication that they're comfortable now shopping online. And what we've seen is there's also been an engagement with new brands. And that's dependent a little bit on category. So in some categories like food and beverage, we're seeing a lot of new brands being purchased because of out-of-stock issues or because of promotions. We're also seeing, interestingly, in other categories like apparel, we're seeing private label brands of clothing and apparel grow as well. And that's probably a little bit driven by what's available in mass channels and club and grocery, and people buying apparel in those retail locations as well. But it's certainly an opportunity right now with all the disruption for brands as well in this new omnichannel world, getting in front of consumers in a way that they weren't able to before. And while we may see, a certain dip in per capita spending as households tighten their belts this year, we're still going to see a significant amount of volume this Christmas. We do a lot of year-over-year tracking again, and one of the things that we're seeing is that between 75 and 80% of shoppers are planning to shop this coming holiday season, and much of that is going to be online. Now, one of the things, if we compare today's shopping experience to what we're going to be seeing in November and December, we're currently in what you might call sort of a down period, right? It's not a busy shopping season. Now, springtime, home and garden categories are up in the spring. There's certain food categories that are up, historically fashion, but we're nowhere near peak retail volume. And what we're starting to see is that even in this slower shopping period, many companies haven't been ready for the amount of volume that they're seeing online. So early indications from consumers tell us that their experiences have been mixed. This is important because any pains that we see in our operations and fulfillment today, they're going to be amplified tomorrow. So while most shoppers, 80% of shoppers are saying that their online shopping occasions have been problem-free, we have about 1 in 5 that are having issues. And if you want to guess at which demographic are having the most issues, it's not going to be a surprise to anyone that it's the youngest shoppers, Gen Z, millennials, because they also have the highest expectation of online and what online is going to offer them. Also, probably not a shock, some of the biggest issues are, delivery times and out-of-stock items. So those are driving pains for a lot of people. That's today. With the abundance of gifts that we're going to be sent and going to be received during the holidays, retailers are really going to need a strategy to mitigate these difficulties, because when we look at 1 in 5, it may seem okay today. We're saying, it's COVID and we're, customers understand that the companies are trying to catch up. But what happens to that 1 in 5 number when online orders double? Or when the volume of mobile visits quadruples the night before Black Friday as people are staying up late in bed to try to get the latest deals that drop at midnight? Do we feel confident that we're ready for this big omnichannel push in the fall? And so that's, again, a bigger part of why we're trying to identify what trends we think are going to continue and which ones may be sort of a flash in the pan or may not be longer term. So today's questions, I'm going to spend the rest of our time together driving into the 3 most common questions we get from clients. We're going to try to address, number 1, are shoppers likely to carry out the behaviors that you care about? Number 2, what's preventing these behaviors from happening more? And number 3, what are the levers we can pull to try to further encourage these behaviors to continue? And to tackle this, we did what researchers do, and we built a model that I'm going to share with you, along with some really interesting early results. So the first question was, what drives behavior? And what we did in order to try to identify what drives behaviors is we asked people about 36 different activities. So this could be any kind of activity related to consumer behavior. It could be, did I visit a bank branch? Did I go online to shop for electronics or apparel? Did I go online for grocery? Did I visit a movie theater? A number of different behaviors. We have 36 of them. And for each of these behaviors, we captured whether people are going to do this activity, whether they thought they would do these more or less or the same as before the pandemic, and whether they thought the change would be temporary, for a couple months, or would this be a permanent change. So that sort of gives us a baseline. So for example, we might say, do you think, one of the behaviors was, I'm going to take extra care to disinfect my home. And the question might have been, do you think you'll take extra care to disinfect your home more or less than before? And if it's more or less, is that sort of temporarily, or do you think you'll permanently be cleaning your home more? But we didn't stop there. So that's the 36. For each activity, we also asked people a set of 30 different statements about their attitudes toward the activity. So things like, do you think the activity is safe? Are others doing it? Does it make you happy? Would you be happy to avoid it? Is there a financial incentive to do this activity? And so on and so forth. You get the idea. There's a lot of different things we can ask about each one. And so finally what we did was we looked for correlations and causations between the 30 attitudes and the likelihood that someone would think that they would do more or less of a given activity. And there's a quick explanation, but ultimately the goal here is to get beyond whether someone thought they would do something more or less, and to understand the underlying reasons why people do the things that they do, and to use that understanding to try to predict the likelihood that things will actually happen or not just what people are saying. So the first thing that we learned, and this really surprised us from the study, is that the reasons why people do something or not are generally the same regardless of the type of activity. So for example, whether you're getting on a plane or going to the grocery store, the reasons why people would decide to do those or not in a post-COVID world are relatively consistent. This is actually great news for us and great news for you because it means that the levers that we have to pull, the set of levers that are at our disposal across activities are essentially the same. We thought it may be different. Maybe the set of levers that drivers that are important for entertainment or travel might be different than for grocery shopping or shopping in a retail or in a mall. But it turns out that they're relatively the same. Now, how we approach those levers might be different based on the activity, but the levers themselves are the same. And the most important ones at a very high level are ease and importance. So let me explain. So what we found is that the likelihood to do something is a function of the ease of doing it and the importance of that activity to somebody. It seems pretty straightforward. But now, looking at it, you may say this is very intuitive, Nami, but we can back this up with data, and we can use that data to understand the stickiness of these various behaviors. Now, personally, I happen to think everything is easier to understand in a 2x2, which is what we put together for you to try to explain the number of different behaviors in a relatively quick and easy way in this short webinar. So let me explain what we're looking at. So we're going to look at a 2x2, and we have an importance scale that goes horizontally. And then we also have an ease scale, which goes vertically. And then we have 4 quadrants. So the top right quadrant is the stickiest of activities, the ones that people say are the most important to them and they find the easiest to do. And we would predict that these ones are going to be the longer lasting behaviors, the ones that are likely to be around for at least 12 to 18 months. If we look at across from that in the bottom left-hand corner, what we see is activities with low importance and low ease. So we would say those would have more limited appeal. We have the top left box, which is things that are sticky for now. And we say sticky for now because these are high ease activities, but people are saying that they're not as important as some of the other activities. And so right now they may be easy to do, and they may be, somewhat important in the current context, but they may not be important in the future. Or we may find that they're more important in the future. And so there's a little bit more diagnosis that needs to be done around the sticky for now items, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. The final box is the bottom right-hand box, and that's things that cause consumer tensions. And so things that are very important to people that they do, but that have been not easy or difficult for consumers to do. And in those situations, it's really up to us as marketers, as companies, retailers, brands, to try to make these things easier in order for these behaviors to stick if we think that they're important. Okay, so that's the 2x2, and up next we can plot the activities. What you see here is this is all 36 activities. You can see how they're distributed. It's sort of, other than the tension box, they're relatively sort of evenly distributed, with a good chunk in the top right corner of high ease and high importance, suggesting that there are a number of things that we think will be sticky. So let's start with that quadrant, the top right-hand quadrant that everyone seems to be most interested in is what's going to stick, what are the highly sticky activities. Now, there's a lot of dots on this. We're not going to talk about every single one. So I've started to scale back the amount of data here to show you guys. We're showing now a subset of activities that are in that box, the ones that are maybe most closely aligned to what we think many clients are thinking about. And if we look at some of these activities, there are some interesting ones in there. So what's in our top right box of stickiness? Well, shopping at a grocery store. People are likely to want to continue to do that. Bank online or via mobile app. Work out at home or outdoors. Meet friends in person. Shop at local businesses. Work from home. And that one I used as an example, take extra care to clean or disinfect my home. Now, some of these are, return to normal activities like meeting a friend or shopping in a grocery store, banking online. Others are newer or significantly exaggerated activities compared to pre-COVID. So things like disinfecting my home, working out at home, right? Maybe weren't things that we saw before, but we predict that based on what consumers are saying about these activities, that they're likely to stick around. Now, a lot of this is based on safety and government restrictions, but it goes beyond just safety. So, for example, if we look at people using their banking app and people going to grocery stores, they'll tell us that those are activities that make them happy, or that they would miss if they weren't able to do those activities. In other cases, when it comes to shopping for small businesses, people feel good about being able to tell others that they support small businesses. And so it's important to them from a more sort of personal and social context. So it is, some of them are safety driven and others aren't, and we're gonna dig into some of those attitudes as well. Okay, let's look at a couple more boxes. So we've got the bottom left, and this was a limited appeal box, so activities with limited appeal. And so what we're seeing in here is we're seeing, in some cases, the opposite. So going into a bank branch, visiting a shopping mall, going to movies, concerts, or sporting events, using public transportation, traveling on a plane, which was actually the least easy or the most difficult activity that people rated, or staying in an Airbnb. Now, some of these I know will be significant to those on the webinar, so including things like, financial services. Going to a branch, was rated one of the absolutely lowest activities in terms of importance. And, is there things that we can do to move the needle on that? And for sure there is. The other one we can't ignore is visiting shopping malls, which consumers rate as right now sort of neither easy nor important, and movie theaters, and both of which are, again, opening this week. And so we're going to diagnose those further in just a couple minutes. Now, interestingly, one of the things that is sort of not reflected in this data, but we did observe, is that, for some activities where people are doing them less, like going to a bank branch or going to a movie, visiting a mall, things that they would have done before, but they're doing less now because of COVID, moving something from, a state of doing it less to back to normal is actually a lot easier than moving things from a place of, I didn't do them before, but I'm starting to do them and I want to maintain that behavior. That's actually harder. And that was reflected in our data as well. So that's good news for a lot of these things in this box. These are all things that have shown that are things that people did before. And so, if we are designing interventions to try to make these easier or more important for people, that's going to be an easier job than trying to get someone to continue doing something that they maybe weren't doing before. So some of those, activities that we're saying right now are sticky, maybe harder to hold on to some of those top spots in the longer term. Okay, let's look at activities that are sticky for now. So if we look to the top left corner, these are activities, again, that are easy but are not as important as some of the other activities. And there's some interesting ones here. So what are we seeing? We're seeing ordering gifts online and having them delivered, shopping online for electronics, stockpiling, shopping for apparel and footwear online, shopping for groceries online, using delivery services, so meal delivery or alcohol delivery services. Interesting things that we're seeing that people are saying are, these are pretty easy to do right now, and if they become more important to me, maybe those will be things that stick around. Interesting ones too here, there's two that are side by side, meeting a financial or insurance rep in person versus meeting a financial insurance rep online. It's interesting they're both very close, although people are saying the in-person is a little bit more important. And one of the reasons for that, in-person has a lot of personalization to it. So it's unclear, necessarily what people were thinking in terms of the experience online. Was that a sort of robo experience? Was it a video call? Was it an, sort of email exchange? But certainly in that face-to-face interaction, people are looking for that personalization, and that's something that, if we want to move people to more of an online advisory situation for financial services, how do we replicate that level of personalization? Interestingly, another one on those two, when people tell us sort of some of the attitudes around the in-person advice versus the online advice, they feel that there's a financial incentive to meet in person, meaning they may be able to either save more money or make more money or be better off financially through that in-person visit. So maybe there's something missing there, or that assurance that the online is going to provide just as good an advice as an in-person visit. And for all these activities too, if these are activities that we think are important and we want to stick, then we have to think about sort of interventions that are going to make these more important, or continue to make these easy into the future. Now the last box, finally the bottom right box, we only find one sort of only activity, which is try on apparel or footwear in a store. It's an interesting activity because for a lot of people it was really important but difficult to do. And they wouldn't feel comfortable doing it even if the restrictions were lifted, because they felt that it was too risky and not safe and not simple and easy to do. In a lot of cases they were saying that no one else would ever do this activity. And the net result is that we find that people, they don't expect to be able to do this activity in the same way that they did before, and they're really curious to understand what the new normal for trying on apparel and footwear would look like. So it's a good activity for innovation because people are looking for something new. They're looking for a new way to do it. In other activities, there's often a substitute. So, you could do it online or with social distancing, but we haven't quite figured that out yet for how to try on clothes. And so, there are ideas out there, augmented reality retail as an example. I can go to Sephora and try on makeup. Can I try on clothes at home and see what they look like through some sort of augmented reality app? And, our sense is that consumers would be open to those type of innovations because it is something that is so important, and they are really trying to understand how they would continue to do it. Okay, so now that we've developed this model, really our goal is to work directly with clients to think more deeply about these specific activities and to test additional activities potentially that may not be on here. So we would ideally fill this chart out with more activities and deep dive on more of the ones that we've sort of touched on very briefly here today. But let's take a look at a few very specific examples that we think are going to be relevant. So one of the things is shopping local and small. So in addition to the uptick in e-commerce that I mentioned before, one of the things that we've been observing is the growing support for local small businesses. And what we've seen is that, for a lot of small businesses, unfortunately, they are struggling right now. And there's a lot of, obviously everyone understands this, a lot of financial indicators to show that. And people really have a desire to support these local businesses. I think even this week is International Small Business Day on the 27th, so it's sort of very timely. And we've seen examples of people trying to do that, trying to support them, right? So, for example, in food services, shoppers would order directly from restaurants instead of going through a meal delivery service to try to save the small business owner those additional fees. And in other categories, we're hearing that shoppers are, visiting local businesses for immediate needs instead of going to larger chains, which may take longer to, wait in line to get into or to have things delivered. So there's a lot of support for businesses right now. And we thought it would be interesting to compare how people are shopping at independent small businesses to how people are shopping at malls, and also how they're ordering things online. So we talked about 36 activities. I'm going to dig into these 3 specific activities for a couple minutes. This is just a reminder of where they are on the matrix and how they compare to each other. And we're going to look at some of the attitudes that I talked about. So I mentioned 30 different attitudes for each of these activities, which helps us understand why people would shop at malls or why people would shop at independent stores or online. So let's have a look at some of those. So if we look at these, again, these are attitudes that, again, are trying to explain why things might fit where they do on our 2x2. The first one is, it's safe. So how do people feel about going to the mall or an independent store or online in terms of safety? Well, we see a clear distribution here. People are feeling that online is much safer, going to the mall less so, and independent sort of in between. Comfort with doing these activities, so how confident are that they're able to do this? This is relatively close. And interestingly here, pretty high confidence in online. And that was really across demographics, which was interesting to see. So people aren't, if we asked this 5 years ago, we might have seen more people say, well, I'm not really confident online. So that sort of barrier has gone away. People will expect me to do this activity. This was an interesting one where we see independent small businesses come out on top. Again, sort of people are expecting that we support small businesses right now, and we're starting to see that in the data and how it's affecting shopping as well. I would do this with my family. So again, less likely go to the mall with the family, maybe more likely to visit an independent store where it's sort of easier to have either the kids wait outside or just quickly run in, and knowing that there's not going to be a big crowd. Definitely easier to shop online with the family. You can all sit around the computer. I know my own sons have been doing that with me a lot. Or, Dad, can we buy this? Can we buy that? I don't want to spend my birthday money. And, we'll sit around the computer and we'll do that together. So can we make it, the mall experience, as an example, easier for people to want to take their families there? I'm curious to know how I'll resume this activity after the pandemic. This was an interesting attitude and really tells us that people aren't sure how to proceed. And I think this is one of the more important ones for brick and mortar retail. We're seeing a higher rating for mall and independent small businesses. And what that's saying is that people aren't sure what it's going to be like. If I go to the mall, how is it actually going to work? What are the mechanics of it? Am I going to have to line up outside the mall? Do I go inside the mall and then line up outside stores? How's the washroom situation going to work? Is the food court going to be open? What's the food court situation? Can I, do I eat there? Do I have to take it home and with me? And so all these sort of unknowns are creating a lot of, I think, tension for those shoppers as well. I won't feel comfortable even when restrictions are lifted. Again, sort of higher from all. These are getting into some of the negative statements and sentiments. And I'd be happy to avoid this in the future. Again, higher for malls than for online. And so if we look at that, and again, there's 30 of these. I didn't want to take you guys through all of them. But if we start to look at these, we get a sense of, why are things sitting in different quadrants? And if I wanted to improve my positioning as a mall, what are the things that I need to work on? And these are some of the ones where we're seeing some more differentiation. Okay, so we talked a little bit about retail. I also want to talk about just briefly what's going on in grocery. So grocery has been an amazing category to follow. It's been really interesting. In the month of May, we actually saw the number of people using grocery pickup and delivery services almost double. So that's the data on the charts there. The purple bars are people who've been using it for more than a month. The orange bars are people saying they started using it in the past month. And that's where, it's not quite double, but it's pretty close, with 13% of people saying that they started using it in the past month. To the point we're now seeing, overall, it's about a third of Canadians have shopped online for groceries. So the question really is, how sustainable is this? So again, just a reminder, 36 activities. We're just going to talk about 2 right now. We're going to look at shopping in-store for groceries versus shopping online. And again, back to the attitudes, what's really driving this behavior? So I'm confident I'll be able to do this. Relatively similar. People are confident in both channels. I'm happy to resume this activity. In-store wins. This activity has always been part of my routine. Again, in-store wins. If I was unable to do this activity, it would make me sad. Again, in-store wins. I'm confident that the safety conditions are in place that allow me to do this. And again, in-store and online, relatively consistent. So far, what we're seeing is that a lot of the in-store metrics are coming out quite positively compared to online. The biggest one really is it safe? And this is where people are saying that they're not confident that going into a store for groceries is safe. And they would need to wear PPE in order to do it. And on the flip side, the time and effort to do this doesn't feel worth it. It's actually higher for online. People are saying, the time and effort to constantly, figure out what's going to be in my shopping list and do the meal planning and build my cart. It is a very time-consuming activity, and people are saying that that's not worth it. And similarly, I'd be happy to avoid this in the future. Again, online grocery coming up higher. So this is a very interesting picture because it's different than what we saw with online retail versus the mall versus independent, where there's a lot of factors driving online. Really, all the factors here are in favor of shopping for groceries in a store. And what we're seeing is that the only thing that's sort of keeping people from being in the store more is safety. And that's why, although half the shoppers are saying they'll continue to buy groceries online, we really expect the magnitude of online grocery sales to decrease in the future. So this is one of those activities that may sort of snap back. Again, it was in that box of it's sticky for now. How long will this be sticky for? We're not confident that it's going to stick around for the long term as safety concerns start to decrease. And the final point I'll make here is that, we did talk a lot about PPE, or we asked questions around the safety that people would feel in store and whether they would feel it's required to wear personal protective equipment. And it's sort of one of the big questions the country is debating right now. I know Fit Kids just released a study that's created a stir certainly in our household by saying that, when kids go back to school in the fall, they won't have to wear face masks. And other people are saying, well, they think they should. My wife's a teacher. She was saying, well, I would like to wear a face mask, and, we'll sort of fill the jury's out on whether that's going to happen or not. But ultimately, what we're finding is that for most shopping, most travel, most entertainment, more than half of Canadians feel that personal protective equipment is necessary, which is both right now a physical barrier, but also a psychological one, because it reminds people that things may not be as safe as they were before. And sort of we see the two move together, concerns around safety and desire to wear PPE. So that's a snapshot. Moving forward, I just want to leave you with three things. The first one is, if we're thinking about the holidays, they're going to be more omnichannel than ever before. And if we're worried about a doubling of online volume or a tripling of online volume, then really now is the time to start planning for that. The second thing that we're going to talk about is that the model for behavior change is really universal. So the levers that we have at our disposal are consistent across activities, but the accelerators and the inhibitors differ by activity. And we'd be really happy to work with you guys to think through what those individual attitudes are towards activities that are important to you, and how do we move the needle on those. And finally, many things will snap back, right? So many things, especially in that bucket of sticky for now, are things that we expect 12, 18 months from now to snap back to what they were like pre-COVID. And the final thing I'll leave you with is that, we did talk about 36 activities being in the study. I talked to you in depth about 5 of them today. So about 14% of all activities. I know there's a lot of you on the phone whose categories we didn't cover, and I apologize for that, but, please, let's talk. And with that, I know there was a couple questions that I saw popping up in the Q&A, and I'll turn it over to Steve as well to help walk through some of those.
Thank you, Nami. There were, in fact, a bunch of questions today. And so I'm going to start with the question that really relates to some of the things that you talked about that will stick. And the simple question is, did they differ in terms of demographics?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, certainly there were differences by demographic, and there were some interesting, I'll just mention a couple that sort of stuck with me. One, if we look at men versus women, men are much more likely to say they'd be happy to avoid the mall, less interested in going to the mall to try on clothing, and sort of felt that activity was less safe and less important. So that was one thing that I definitely remember. In general, boomers were saying that certain activities they felt would be riskier for them in particular, so older demographics. Although it's funny because despite saying that a lot of activities would be riskier for someone like them, boomers are also just across the board, they will say that things are easier. So they have a lot of confidence in being able to do things, which sort of resonates with me. And talking to my parents, they're very confident to go out and do things, even though they feel that they're risky. So there are some definite differences. Younger shoppers, we talked about independent small businesses. Younger shoppers were less likely to want to support businesses, particularly your Gen Z shoppers. Conversely, Gen X's shoppers are most likely to want to support small businesses. So there is, to answer the question, just quickly, there are a lot of differences, and we can certainly look into the differences for specific activities if people are interested.
So there's clearly a bunch of retailers who are engaged in this webinar. There's a bunch of bankers, because one of the questions that has come up several times is whether or not you think that what's happening now and in the near term should be changing the footprint that retailers and banks might have, whether it means a smaller footprint or a reconfigured footprint or what have you? Any thoughts on that?
So, I mean, should we be rethinking what physical retail looks like in the future? I think absolutely. Right now I would say companies should probably, and this is maybe less banking specific, but companies, should definitely be thinking about making investments in logistics and fulfillment, because we're seeing that, that's going to be a tension in the future. Should we assume that everything is going to go online? Are people not going to shop in bank branches anymore? Not transact in bank branches anymore? I would say, probably not. It's tempting to think so. It's tempting to think that we can just do everything online. But the reality is, as I was saying before, a lot of things are going to snap back. And I think, while there may be some correction, we may, not need quite as many branches or quite as many large retailer locations, that it would be, I think, a danger to sort of wholesale, want to eliminate a lot of them. And I think, so the last thing I'll say on that one too is that, if we look at what Main Street looks like right now in a lot of towns and a lot of cities in Canada, it's going to look a lot different post-COVID, right? And that's an unfortunate reality, but unfortunately a lot of, I think, retail locations are going to be vacant. And so I think that also creates opportunities for either existing businesses or new businesses to think about, how can I be closer to the consumer, and how can I provide, some of those more immediate needs for consumers, and maybe it's through some of that retail as well. So, sorry, there's a couple different thoughts there, but I think the answer is, my short answer is, yes, we should be thinking about it. No, it's probably not as dramatic a shift as we might think, looking at some of the metrics today.
So you talk about a number of different channels in your response there. Here's a person who's asking about what retailers do to prepare for an increase in omnichannel shopping, probably this Christmas. What kinds of things can they do to prepare for that?
Sure, that's a great question, and I didn't really get into the specifics of that, but I think there's a lot of things that we're seeing best-in-class companies do. One of the biggest ones that's always been a push from consumers, they've been asking for it for years, is the ability to check inventory online. Before I go into a store, so I'm not sort of wasting my time going to a store and finding things that are out of stock is a key one. Related to that, I think in this environment, it's probably, can I use my mobile app, or can I use my mobile website to make the in-store experience more efficient? So, some of the things that we're hearing from customers is that they want to be able to get in and out more quickly, right? They're spending less time browsing in stores. And so, can I use my mobile device as a way to, estimate wait times, or especially in the wintertime, like no one wants to stand outside a store. So can I check on my phone, how long am I going to have to wait before I go inside if I need to pick something up? And then there's just like the usual sort of omnichannel hygiene, right? Making sure that things are consistent online and in the store, and mobile first, and all those types of things. But I think there's for sure opportunities coming out of sort of consumer concerns related to COVID that will make, I think that retailers can leverage to make omni-channel shopping easier this season.
Is there any indication from the work that you've been doing as to whether or not shoppers are looking for a one-stop shop? Has that increased or not?
It's an interesting question because, and I can answer it for, we don't have it for all categories, but if we look at sort of shopping mission, we were expecting to see a big increase in bulk shopping because people want to just get everything done at once. And that wasn't necessarily the case. It was fairly consistent in terms of how people were shopping before, in terms of, doing a big bulk shop, But there's also a good number of people that are just doing, I needed something immediately, or just wanted to pick up a few small items. So that shift didn't happen. And I think, part of that may be online too, right? Because, while I may be in some categories doing more of a bulk shop like grocery, because I don't want to have to, pick up my groceries every other day, and maybe I make a list and I do that once a week or once every 2 weeks. In other categories where I'm shopping online, particularly if I'm a Prime member, I may be getting things, sort of on demand. I might need to order something today, order something else tomorrow. So I would say, the desire for a one-stop shop maybe hasn't changed that much, but how people are thinking about, a bulk shop versus something for, like a smaller 1 or 2 items, what that looks like probably has changed a bit.
In the last webinar that we had, which was really about the subject of innovation, one of the questions that came up, and it's come up again today, is the idea that if there was one piece of advice that you could give our clients and those that are in budgeting season, if there was one piece of advice that you could give people as they start to budget for 2021, what would that piece of advice be?
Well, Steve, I think I'll give you 3, actually. I know you asked for 1, but I'll take a little liberty with this one. I'll say, I think probably the most important one that we're seeing out of some of this behavior work that I talked about today is communication, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty, I think, among shoppers about how they're going to resume normal shopping activities. And I think those stresses are going to be elevated in a busy shopping season where we know there's going to be more people and we know there's more immediate needs. And so communicating to consumers how they're going to be able to do the things that they used to do without even thinking about them is going to be super important. So whether that's giving them assurance that they're going to be able to go, into a mall or visit a theater with their family or, get things delivered on time if it's online. Sort of just providing that communication is going to be super important. And I said 3 because I think number 2 would be making sure that our systems that can actually back that up. So if we're saying we can do something, making sure that we actually do it. And the third thing I'll say, because I touched on it a couple times, is just that, consumers have a short memory, and so things are going to snap back. And so let's, be very careful about what we put together as our strategy.
Okay, well, on that note, and being mindful of time, I'd like to thank you, Nami, for the time that you spent doing this. And I'd like to thank all of those people who joined us today. So thank you very much, and please stay safe.
Thanks.